Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Non-Toxic Environments Podcast. This is Andy Pace, your host. And once again, back for another fantastic show. This is actually the final show for our fall 2023 season. We'll start back up again in a few weeks, but allowing everybody to take some time away for the holidays, time to be with family, time to sort of reset. And I'm sure you all have your New Year's resolutions. I normally don't do those because it's just disappointing when they don't come true. But it's a good time of the year to just kind of reset, relax, restore the body a little bit, and move on to the next year. So today, this is a fantastic show to end the season on. We have on with us Dr. Gautam Gulati and Dr. G, as you may all know him as. And a little bit about him, and again, this is going to be fantastic. He's the founder of The Well Home, often referred to as the maestro of wellness. Dr. G designs luxury interiors focused on health, longevity, and well-being by applying the science of healthy design to our homes and beyond. Dr. G, it is absolutely my pleasure to have you on the show today.
Well, Andy, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me, and quite an honor to be closing out your season for the year.
Well, I appreciate it. The timing was perfect, but honestly, this is wonderful. This season has been full of wonderful guests talking about the process of mold remediation, talking about the health aspects of building. We've talked to a number of authors, journalists who are involved in teaching us and educating us about this. But this is really special to have you on the show because of obviously your background, being an MD, being involved in medicine, and then transforming that into how we design and build our homes. I've got to ask you at the start, how in the world did you get to this? You going through medical school, and then you decided, you know what, the built environment needs help.
Well, I've always it's a much more complicated answer than one that was really intentional in terms of the process and journey to get here. I think as part of my pursuits in life, I've always seen where the opportunities are and just took a little bit of a blind faith bet on it and just pursued passions around it, and it's worked out for the past 25 or so years. It just happens to be, I kind of like how Steve Jobs had mentioned in one of his commencement speeches, where he said that you can only connect the dots looking backwards. And it seems that I've built up these sort of set of skills and experiences that over time, when converged, makes great sense in terms of how the well home came to be. But, as you mentioned, I'm a medical doctor, but I've spent my career driving innovation for different companies. And of course, as part of innovation process, you're combining different elements to come up with something novel. And in this case, it turns out that as a child, I'd always been involved with real estate from a family perspective. In fact, taking Sundays and going to look at open houses and purchasing properties and doing adaptive reuse of industrial buildings into new, upgraded zoning options for the buildings and reimagining experiences for it. But then also, in the homes that we moved about in, really taking an interest in the designs of these homes, and the interest of the design, real estate, the interior design, real estate, and healthcare aspect really came to fruition when my dad actually had Alzheimer's. And so I got my firsthand experience in having to caretake with somebody, in living in a home environment with a particular condition. And quite frankly, as a physician, it was really eye-opening. And so that was really the spark, and we can get into the story behind it and what really drove that. But that was really the genesis around how the well home came to be. It was a series of steps over the course of time that I saw no one else was really doing anything about it. And I felt in particular, my combination of skill sets was the right combination to really put something forth. And as far as I still know to this date, I'm the only medical doctor who's also a real estate professional and a certified interior designer. Somebody
Wow.
can correct me if I'm wrong.
That's fantastic. What a fantastic group of skills. And so, our stories are a little similar. Now, I'm not a medical doctor by any means, but I grew up in a family where the family business was commercial construction, architecture. Our dinner table chats were not about school and sports. It was about construction sites and these architects are working with. And so I knew at a young age, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. But as I got exposed to the industry, uh, it dawned on me that what we're doing as a whole, the industry is not healthy for the occupants. Now, I got involved in this in the early 1990s. By the mid to late 1990s, the United States Green Building Council started, and they created what's called the LEED program, which I'm sure you're very well aware of. But LEED stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. And at the time, I was on the board of directors of the Wisconsin affiliate. And I can tell you that at no time did the Green Building Council ever focus on the health of the occupant. It was all about environmental issues. And so I have to imagine that as you've developed what you've been doing, you've also looked at that same, that the things that we're doing in our built environment may be eco-friendly, but they certainly aren't human-friendly.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think we spent a lot of these years thinking about the green and sustainability of these homes, but not in the context of our health. And I firmly believe that health begins in the home. And I can share a number of reasons why I believe that is the case, especially from a physician perspective. But it's interesting, we are starting to see the equivalent of LEED certification into the healthcare world with the WELL certification. So I co-chair the residential committee for the International Well Building Institute, which also creates the WELL certification, which was essentially a part of the same team that developed the LEED certification as well. So we're starting to see movement in the space. I think it is slow. I think we're at the very beginning of it. I think people are trying to wrap their head around what does it mean when we say health inside the home. And we can dig into some of the elements of what that entails. But certainly, I'm in the belief as you are that health begins in the home.
For sure. And so, yes, I remember when the well standard first came out, and it was introduced at one of the USGBC Greenbuild shows. And at the time, it really was just basically like a duplication of LEED, but then they started going into those healthier aspects of construction. Um, it's very good to see. The problem I've always had, and maybe you can shed some light on this, is that when it came to indoor air quality, the LEED standard always focused on VOC content of materials as a metric for determining whether or not a product is considered, approved for use. VOCs are regulated by the EPA because of outdoor air pollution. There's no other regulation on the books because of VOCs from a human health standpoint directly. So as a consumer walking into a hardware store, picking up a gallon of paint to do some repainting in the house, most consumers now are sort of conditioned to buy a zero VOC paint, thinking they're buying something that's actually healthy for them. And in actuality, it's not at all. It's better for the outdoor environment, but it still contains a lot of toxins that are not classified as VOCs. So this is the problem I had with the USB GBC LEED program. And I'm hoping that the WELL standard now will delve into this, that more of those issues with human health as opposed to an indirect environmental human issue.
That's absolutely correct. I think building health is very different standards from human health. And as far as I know, I believe that they are looking at some of those parameters. I haven't dug into some of the details. But you're absolutely right. I think some of the microparticles that we're looking at inside the built environment from a human perspective are very different. It's a very different subset versus those that we would look at from a building perspective. And it's funny, we actually start from the inverse. We start with the condition first, and then work our way backwards. So for example, if you're someone who struggles with asthma, what are in particular the particles and triggers that could influence any kind of asthmatic attack inside the home, or exacerbation. And so we try to mitigate and understand what the air quality is in the home first, by running some tests, and then ultimately, providing some of the materials and equipment to deal with that.
Yeah, I think the unintended consequence of trying to do the right thing has led to maybe some of the things we're seeing now in homes and in buildings. I totally agree with the desire to reduce our dependence on oil and gas and so forth. From a standpoint of energy efficiency, I get it. But it's again that unintended consequence of trying to do the right thing. What are we actually doing in our homes? And I was having a conversation with a builder just recently, and he was talking about how in the last 20 years, homes have become mold factories because of we're building these homes tighter and tighter from an energy efficiency standpoint, but then we're forgetting the fact that moisture has to go somewhere and it
Mhm.
gets locked into the wall. So as a physician who also is in the design and construction and the selling of homes and so forth, how are you seeing this play out? Is this something that the industry is taking a look at?
Um, Sorry, in terms of the environmental component or the human
from
health
from
condition?
the from a human health standpoint, because I think we're all in agreement. Energy buildings need to be more energy efficient, 100%.
Yeah.
But then what? What's happening to the human occupants?
Right. And I don't think, I just want to be clear that I don't think that they're independent of each other. I think,
No.
when we talk about the built environment and its implications in terms of our human health, we are still saying environment. So of course we know that the environment impacts our human health. So I do think that the combination of what the lead standards combined with the well standards is ultimately where we need to go. I don't think it's one or the other.
Mhm.
I don't think the science is hugely robust in this space just yet. I think, if you dig into, in particular, respiratory types of conditions, or even mental health conditions, there are some research and reports that will help shed light in terms of how the built environment can impact things. Like, for example, types of lighting, how that impacts sleep disorders, types of colors and materials can impact some mental health behaviors. Of course, what's in the air can impact respiratory diseases. We have studies that show this, but we don't yet have the studies directly to show how one can get impacted by addressing it inside, at least specifically inside the home. We have some building stuff. There's, of course, healthy buildings, which have been studied, and looking at the impact it has on people's human health, but not so much in the residential component. Which
You
is
know that
surprising, which is really surprising to me, considering, we spend most of our time inside of this, I think post-COVID, we spend roughly 78% of our time inside of our homes. And it's
mm,
a place that we spend the most amount of dollars, and we do nothing about it from a healthcare perspective. So it really boggles my mind that we don't have more science and more information around it. But we're hoping to help bridge that gap and develop some of that science as well as we work with some clientele.
well, I think, and that is certainly the direction we're going now. I think because of COVID, uh, we're being forced to look at this a little stronger, a little more detail. One of the things you touched on that I would like to dig into a bit more is the mental health side of design and construction. I've had many guests on the show. I have many of my consulting clients that will actually say, "Well, thank you for bringing that up because this is a stressful situation." How What do we do as an industry to sort of cut down on the stress that's involved in design and construction, not only from a standpoint of just the stresses of what we're doing, but also this feeling that we have to do everything the best. We have to do everything 100%. And if we don't do it 100%, why do it at all? I mean, how do you approach that with a client?
From the builder perspective, or from the client looking to
From
implement
the
changes
client,
inside the
yeah.
home? Yeah, I mean, they're really, it's what's amazing about this is there's a lot of small changes that you can have that have large impact, right? So really feeding off of that notion of what James Clear has talked about in his book Atomic Habits, that small changes can have big results. And what people oftentimes don't realize, there are the little things inside the home that can have drastic changes. So you're not having to spend, massive reno projects to essentially get the health benefits from it. So for example, when we're talking about somebody who's struggling with loneliness or depression, there are simple things that you can do, from changing paint colors, adjusting lighting, bringing the outdoors inside, having more plant elements, what they call biophilia in the space. Even looking at the air quality can actually have improvements. The types of foods that they eat can actually have improvements. So we're really trying to bridge the elements of not just medicine and how you live your life, but also the environment that you're in. And the reality is, most people don't want to care for themselves. They want to be cared for.
Mm.
And so the biggest benefit that I see from incorporating design elements into the home that can improve health is these changes are oftentimes invisible and just require passive involvement on behalf of the individuals. Because we all know that if it requires a lot of action on my part as an individual, as a client, then I'm less likely to do it.
Mm.
And so we specifically look for ways that reduce the friction and oftentimes require absolutely nothing of them. So, in applying the Pareto principle, we can actually accomplish probably 80% of the benefits by just doing 20% of the changes inside the home. And so the key question is, depending on the client and depending on the particular condition, what are the 20% of changes that we need to do to get 80% of the benefits? So it doesn't necessarily have to be this big project, big stressful thing that they have to undergo.
That's great advice there, because again, it's always a situation where, especially I'm dealing with somebody who does have a serious medical condition, whether it's chronic inflammatory response or mast cell activation. We have to look at this like every detail of the project. And if that detail is not done correctly, there's always that fear, that long-term fear. What if I didn't do it correctly? What if it's not enough? And that is usually then the reason why they don't even step forward on the project. They can't even dip their toe in the water because they're afraid of the results before they even start.
Well, I mean, one of the ways that we circumvent that is we hold ourselves accountable. So once we're done with the project, we don't ultimately just hand it off. We follow up with them in 3 months and 6 months and 9 months. And if something isn't working or they're not seeing improvement, we will make additional alterations or changes as a result of that. So I do believe that it's sort of our responsibility that if we're in this to actually improve the health of the people that we're trying to serve, then we have to hold ourselves accountable to do that. And so from our standpoint, I never worry about the fact that we may not be making the impact. It may not be right the first time. Maybe we have to go back and make some iterative changes, and that's okay. At the end of the day, my job is a success if I've made an improvement on the client that we serve. And so it's not just about delivering the design elements of the home, but holding ourselves accountable to do so.
Oh, that's great. And understanding that you're not, when the project's done, it's not as if you're gone on to the next project. You are making sure they are comfortable with everything that was completed. That's wonderful to hear. Now, from a standpoint of
Right.
the medical industry, the medical profession, has the idea of things like chemical sensitivity and mold sensitivity, has this really become part of the lexicon? Is this something that is being discussed, or is it still sort of on the fringes?
No, absolutely not. It's not being discussed at all. It's only inside conversations, and it's really unfortunate that this type of training doesn't happen in the healthcare professional world. And the hope is that ultimately, if we can bring it to the forefront, we can change things like that. But for now, it's actually, none of this is part of that conversation or lexicon.
Wow. I remember when I first got started in this, almost, over 30 years ago now, I worked with a physician in Texas, Dr. Bill Ray, and he had what's called the American Environmental Health Foundation. And he dealt with people every day who had extreme chemical sensitivities. He had a clinic where people could fly down to, stay there, detox for weeks or months. Uh, and I remember having a conversation with him. He was saying that it was on the cusp of the American Medical Association actually listing multiple chemical sensitivity as a documented disease, but it never got there. It just kind of went away.
Yeah.
And now we're seeing that chemical sensitivity is not necessarily a disease in and of itself. It's actually a symptom of another underlying cause.
Yeah. Well, we also have to be honest about how our healthcare system functions, right? Our healthcare system isn't designed in a way that wants to prevent illness, right? It's a sick care system, not a healthcare system.
Mm.
And so when it functions as a sick care system, it's designed to treat once you have symptoms or you have a condition. What we try to do with the home is essentially try to get at the conditions, and it sort of plays in the prevention world. And sort of our healthcare system doesn't know how to really handle compensation, reimbursement. Our existing structures aren't designed in a way to handle prevention of illnesses. And we firmly believe that we can actually use the home to not just better manage conditions, but even potentially reverse and prevent conditions from happening. And that's just not part of the conversation just yet. But again, if we do our part and we do it well, and we track outcomes and we track data, the hope is that ultimately we can convince the healthcare system that this is the route to take. And there should be some sort of reimbursement structure so that we're not putting the burden on the individuals to better design their homes for optimizing outcomes and care. But it's also better for their books, for their bottom line to do so, because the less people you have entering the system, the less of a cost burden it is, not only just for the taxpayers, but for the system itself.
It's so hard to get that point across to the insurance companies, though, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean fighting and trying to convince the incumbents of how this works is is definitely complicated. There's obviously a lot of lobbying, a lot of policy work and regulations around it. There's a lot that actually goes into it. But we are, I mean, what is where physicians are having a conversation is around this notion of value-based care, which is basically saying we need a system that's more accountable and focused on prevention as such. The question is how do you monetize that in a system that's traditionally built on a sick care system? So, for example, like even in the pharmaceutical space, if you say, "Well, we're going to create something that's going to be curative," well, it doesn't benefit the pharma company, right? They want something that you have to take every day for the rest of your life. That's just sort of the business models that they run. So. It really is going to, not only just the biopharmaceutical companies, but the insurance companies, the PBMs, the health systems, the allied health professionals, the entire network has to be sort of working in conjunction together to really make that happen. So I think we're a ways off from that. But I do see the sort of the writing on the wall that I don't know if it's going to be 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. The direction is certainly moving towards there to a true healthcare system, mostly because consumers are demanding it.
It's interesting how the last 10, 15 years now, consumers have this more of a mentality of I'm going to take these healthcare decisions into my own hands and not just rely on the system. But yes, we definitely have a long way to go with that. Now, this is going to be kind of I don't want to say a loaded question, but because everybody has their own opinions on this, but your opinion happens to be a little more educated than mine, and a number of people uh, who are commenting on this. If you had your way, carte blanche, you could design a home any way you wish. And I'm not talking about the style, the colors. I'm talking about how that home gets built, the framing, the construction. What would be your ideal way to build a home in the US?
Well, I haven't done work at the level of getting involved with the skeleton of the home just
Okay.
yet. We typically work on the interiors.
Mm.
However, where my mind has been going and where I've been having conversations is how do we essentially think about building neighborhoods that incorporate blue zone thinking? So blue zones, I don't know if people are familiar with it. They're essentially the identified cities around the world where they have the greatest percentage of people who live to be centenarians, people who live to be 100 years or older. In fact, there's a recent documentary on Netflix called The Blue Zones. And I was in recent conversation with Dan Buettner, who's the founder of the Blue Zones. And so for me, if we know, what contributes to longevity. And when I say longevity, I'm not just talking about the number of years in our life. I'm not talking about what we call lifespan, but also health span, the number of life we have in our years. Like, how do we live longer, but at a healthier state? Because no one wants to live to 100 with 5 different chronic conditions. It's just a horrible way to live. So how do we extend and delay chronic diseases and extend life and longevity as a result of that? So we have some of those answers when you look at some of the blue zone cities, and they're not really complicated things, right? They're not, but at the same time, they're also not hacks, right? We like to go on Instagram and see all these influencers really pushing these overnight hacks of if you just do this, you're going to get this, right? I mean, to get healthy, like I like to say, health is not a destination, it's a way of being, right? It's a story over time. And so you have to live that way on a daily basis to actually reap the benefits of truly getting longevity. And so for me, and in fact, actually, we're exploring with a couple of massive builders, we're exploring a ground up development project at looking at creating an entire neighborhood that incorporates blue zone philosophy into our thinking. So we look at how people eat in the neighborhood. Could we put in, vertical urban farming where everybody gets, weekly fresh produce at their door with a chef that actually recommends recipes for different types of conditions at their disposal? Are there ways that we can incorporate better social connection to combat the epidemic around loneliness through walkabilities and trails and things like that? Can we get better water filtration systems? Can we get better air quality? Can we look at better movement inside the neighborhood as well? And so we're not, for me, I think it's not just about the house structure and what's inside, but also the dynamics that play in entire neighborhoods. And for me, that would sort of be the gold measure, and so that every neighborhood that we develop going forward incorporates healthy design into the construct of the building itself.
I have a conversation with clients going on right now, specifically looking for a development like this. So, and I know over the years I've talked to numerous people who are interested in something like this. I can't wait to hear what happens down the
Yeah, so
road
I
with
can't
this.
share more details about it just yet, but
That's
yeah,
fine.
we're actively working on a 300 single family home project
Wow.
that could come into play, and we're actually it's going to be water independent, food independent, energy independent, and all the bells and whistles. It'll be the most health and wellness advanced neighborhood in the entire country. At least that's what
Wow.
we're striving for.
Absolutely thrilling. And if I could add just one request is that if you can make part of it also like just rented townhouses, apartments as well, because there's a lot of folks who want to live in a community like this, but they just can't afford the cost to build.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think the way these things oftentimes come about is that you have to, just like if you look at the phone, you look at the car, automobile, you look at, Uber, you have to sort of start with a little bit of a wealthy clientele at first
Sure.
to really prove case.
Mm.
And then you can figure out a way to essentially scale it at a much more affordable rate. So unfortunately, this type of thinking is going to probably those where the most of the world can't afford it.
Mhm.
But the idea is ultimately that if we can figure out more economies of scale and how to deploy it, that we can bring it down to a more affordable design process so that everyone can essentially enjoy it.
Sure. The proof of concept and then try to bring it out more to the masses.
Yeah.
I love the concept of that. So tell me a little bit about maybe some projects you've worked on that would be interesting for our listeners. I mean, I can't imagine that they'll probably all are interesting, but because you had mentioned before just the concept of changing colors to elevate mood. I remember one of the paint companies I work with out of California called AFM Safecoat. They developed a paint line, a color line
Mm.
years ago based upon Ayurvedic principles. And so we would determine what dosha the clients in the were or the household members were, and then we provided paint colors based upon bringing harmony to those doshas. And at the time, I think it was groundbreaking research on paint. But I imagine it's kind of that thought process and then beyond that you've dealt with.
Yeah, that's great that you guys are looking at paint and how that impacts our mental health and health overall. I'm waiting for the day that eventually our paint is kind of like our circadian lighting that we can put into the home.
Oh,
It can adjust over time and shade throughout the course of the day, so it's not one static color, but something that's actually adaptive. That would be a phenomenal invention or innovation if somebody could listening maybe wants to develop that. But I'll give you two sort of use cases. We serve two sets of clients. We have one that really is focused on longevity and the prevention side of things, and we deal with sort of the ultra high net worth individuals and building out longevity features inside their home. And then the other side of our business is those focused on people living with chronic health conditions, and what are some things that we can do inside their existing home. So let me start with the chronic health condition. So a good use case example, dementia is certainly a massive need, right? We're about one in every three individuals eventually is going to be suffering with some form of memory loss. Hopefully not to the point of Alzheimer's, but definitely some form of dementia. And it takes a real toll on the individuals. But there's simple things that we can do around the house when those symptoms do start to develop to really combat that. So, for example, the questions that arise oftentimes are, when do I know that we need to bring them onto the main floor and they can't take the stairs anymore? Are there digital tools that we can utilize to track if they're at flight risk, or maybe if they're at fall risk and they're living in my home and I need to track them or be notified if they fall, and how do we prevent that? Are there ways that we can redesign movement around the home to avoid trip hazards? When they start shuffling or they forget where they move inside the home. When do we put safety features like safety bars inside the showers for them? There's a common thing in Alzheimer's and dementia patients called sundowning, where usually when the sun goes down in the evening, agitation kicks up.
mm,
And oftentimes we use medication to try to sedate them a little bit during that time to reduce the agitation. But there's actually natural things that you can do. It's, bring more of the outdoors in. So try to get as much sunlight as they possibly can during the day to reduce the symptoms in the evening. Change up the paint colors in the room that they're going to be when they're oftentimes, during that time period. Change up the lighting of your home to be able to accommodate and adjust based on that. Also smells, aromatherapy, something that we also look at in terms of triggering agitation and being able to soothe and release it and reduce stress. Then we also look at the connectivity around the home, how to make them inclusive. So yeah, you can start to see that one simple dementia has a host of things that we can do inside the home um, that really aren't that complicated. It's just a matter of making the family and the individual aware of what's possible. And like I said before, making 20% of the changes to get 80% of the results. So that's a prime good case on the chronic condition side. We also get a lot of sleep. People have a lot of sleep issues, and there's certain things that we do and recommend inside the bedroom as well. Um, and then, do you want me to go? The other use case that we have where it's the longevity. We just built out and finished a project where we did a wellness suite. And we basically did a complete survey and analysis of what we like to do is get a snapshot of where they want to be into the future, and then reverse engineer that. So if I want to be, what do I want to do in the last decade of my life? I want to be able to pick up the kids. I want to go for a hike. I still want to be skiing. And so based on where they envision their future to be, we then incorporate certain changes inside the home, based on those longevity parameters. And we typically look at 6 or 7 different areas. We do a sleep sanctuary. We do a movement studio, a rest and recovery spa. We do a well kitchen. We do a smart health bathroom, and then we look at general health and safety across the home, including like air and water and things like that. So, in this particular home, for example, we incorporated the science of contrast therapy. Of you oftentimes hear people doing sauna and then cold plunge or some sort of ice therapy. Well, there's actually a science around it. And I don't want to bore some of your guests here, but when you do that extreme exchange from hot to cold or cold to hot, it releases what's called sirtuins in your body, which are essentially proteins that are responsible for DNA repair in your epigenetics. And so it's actually known to shown that when you create those sort of micro adverse stresses on your body, it boosts those proteins in your body and actually is responsible for potentially delaying aging in the process. So with those types of things in mind, for example, this client just wanted a sauna. I said, no, you want to do it. If you want to get the most health benefits out of it, do it with contrast therapy. And you don't have to do an ice plunge. You can just do a vitamin C cold shower next to it and go back and forth. And so we installed, for example, an infrared sauna right across from a high pressurized vitamin C infused shower with the cold contrast back and forth therapy in that suite, but also with chromotherapy, aromatherapy, and some of the other elements to create sort of a mindful haven or a mindful space for meditation and yoga that they wanted to do as well. And there's a host of other things that we did in the home, but that's on the flip side of chronic conditions and focused on prevention and longevity.
I can firsthand tell you how I've done that. Fire and ice. I have a friend of mine who owned a one of these studios that I would go to once in a while, and to go 10 minutes in the infrared sauna, a 5 minute plunge in 43-degree water. If you can make it 5 minutes, most people make it about 10 seconds before they jump out, but I got up to 5 minutes, and I cannot tell you how good it felt. The
Yeah,
next 2 days, I just felt like my body was tingling, not in a bad way, but like all of a
yeah.
sudden the blood was flowing in a way that it hasn't in a long time.
That's great that you're doing it. Most people are doing these things, but they're doing it blindly. They don't understand truly what impact it's having. In fact, when you are doing it, for example, if you look at some of the literature, and we are starting to see some science around this, the best time duration for each when you're doing the swap is roughly what I call 20/4. So 20 minutes of hot therapy, followed by 4 minutes of cold therapy, and then stop. You don't have to keep going back and forth. And if you just
Okay.
do that 3 times a week, you're going to get the health benefits of doing that. You don't have to do it multiple times a day, just 3 times a week, and just one time, per on those days. But there's also they show diminishing returns that if you go beyond 5 6 minutes, actually, if you go beyond 5 minutes, there's actually not much of a greater health benefit for every second that you go beyond it.
Hmm.
And if you go beyond 6 minutes of cold therapy, it actually has damaging effects to your body. So people that are trying to be all bold and brave and say, I've been in there for 10 minutes, you're actually doing more damage. So there's a science behind how and what you should be doing. Um, but again, these are things that we explain to our clientele when we put these designs inside their home.
No. More is not always better. Matter of
No,
fact, that
definitely not.
old adage of everything in moderation, this is exactly what we're
That's
talking
right.
about.
That's right.
So you had mentioned before the bedrooms, and I want to touch on that a bit because it's something I discuss quite a bit on the show here, is that the bedroom has to be the most important room of the home. We got to get those 6 to 8 hours of restorative sleep every night. And anything we do throughout the day, all that damage we get from outside influences of chemical exposure or mold exposure or electromagnetic field exposure, the bedroom is where we need to recover from that. And so, what are a couple of your tips for bedrooms for making those a healthier space?
Well, we also oftentimes like to just think, well, there's some universal things that apply to everyone, and there probably are. But usually for me, I like to understand what are the sleep issues first, before delving into it. And what are the patterns. So I usually, for example, I'll put like I wear an aura ring, and an
Mhm.
aura ring for me gives me my sleep patterns, and I can understand, all sleep is not created equal, right? So some people need less, some people need more, different baselines for different people. Obviously they're in different environments, so we work with whatever specific environment that they're in. They're different types of jobs. If you're, a shift worker versus somebody who has a 9 to 5 job. So all of these factor in to determine how best to approach sleep. But I personally believe that awareness is the first obstacle to getting better sleep. So if you just have the individual track and understand, how much, when am I going to bed? Is it the same time every night? Am I getting up this every night? Am I being woken by sounds? Are there things that are interrupting it? Do I have blue light around me before I'm sleeping? Do I have notifications? The phones that we always keep next to our bed, those things are silently, but you don't even know, invisibly impacting our sleep over the course of the night. What's the lighting like? What's the temperature like? We know that there's a particular temperature set to get optimal sleep. What's the mattress like? What are the materials that we're utilizing? But then looking at your specific data, how much light sleep am I getting? How much REM sleep? How much deep sleep? What's my HRV? My heart rate variability? What's my heart rate, resting heart rate? What's my respiratory rate? What's my body temperature? From all of those things, we can determine what kind of sleep quality you're actually happening. So it's funny because people always say, well, I don't need a device to tell me when I got good sleep or when I didn't get good sleep. I can just wake up in the morning and tell you. And the honest truth is that's completely false, because how you feel when you wake up in the morning is just one piece of the puzzle, because you can still get up and feel like crap, but you may have gotten great sleep that night. And really you won't know that until you actually understand some of the influences and looking at some ways it impacted. So for me, in wearing this device, simply by understanding what things impact my sleep, like what temperature gets me worse sleep, what environment, if there's noise, what things I eat beforehand, and how far in advance do I eat things that affect my sleep. I've biohacked my entire self. So I know, for example, certain foods after a certain hour, um, will cause worse sleep than other foods, even types of foods that I eat within a certain duration of sleep. So all of those things impact the quality of sleep. And we know, oftentimes we only hear about when we talk about health, what you eat and how much you exercise. But I feel like doing those things and eating right and exercising a lot in the absence of good sleep is almost a moot point. And I feel like it's the trifecta of getting all three of those things right that truly contribute to delaying aging, and living your best life. And so it's really one of those areas that people oftentimes get amazed by how much more complex it actually is.
Mhm.
And even though I describe it as complex, the things that we recommend are super simple to do.
Well, and what you're talking about is something that we all could do. I mean, you can wear a device, you can work with a professional. It's not something that we can solve with just taking a supplement. I think that's one of the things that we see
Right.
in
We've
this
become a
country is
pill
that we,
popping culture, right? I just want to take the
exactly
Ambien, I want to take magnesium, right? And
right,
there's certain cases where that's appropriate, but
right.
it's not a fix all hack.
No, and I think these are things that once you understand the information, I'm always a big believer too of doing air quality tests and even if somebody says there's nothing going on in the home that they know of in an acute situation, if you have that baseline information is if it's good or bad, it's still good, really, to have that information. If we understand what's happening in our home around us, we understand what's happening in our sleep or lack thereof, we can then find, a historical track record of what things are occurring and how to fix it without having to just rely on taking a couple of nighttime Tylenols and calling
Yeah.
it a day.
Yeah, and I like to say often that our habits are formed by how we inhabit our home.
Mhm.
And so, our habits are essentially formed, particularly by what we're aware of. So, for example, I occasionally will put on a CGM, what's called a continuous glucose monitor that you put on, like the Freestyle Libres or the
Mhm.
Dexcom. There's a couple of them out there. But in terms of how our body metabolizes and reacts to certain things, you truly don't know until you actually test it out and understand what foods impact your glucose levels. And so that's really eye-opening. So just simply by knowing that and being aware that if I'm, for me, for example, eating a banana really spikes my glucose, but it doesn't for others. So
Hmm.
now that I'm aware of it, for me, when I eat that next banana, I'm going to understand like it changes my habits over the course of time. And the same thing, simply by tracking and understanding, how alcohol or how foods or how movement or how technology impacts my sleep. Once I'm aware of it, once you know it, you can't unknow it.
Hmm.
And so automatically, that's the first step in getting behavior change and habit change. And then ultimately, you're going to change the way you inhabit your home.
So one of our listeners asked this question about going back to the concept of light and circadian rhythms. He says our obsession with energy efficiency has driven higher performance windows, making interiors dark and gloomy. I read research somewhere in the past that implied dropping the visible light transmittance increased the risk of seasonal effectiveness disorder. Is there anyone have a site for research on this, or is this something that you've looked at?
There is and I'm blanking out on her name. If you go to the International Well Building Institute, they actually have a really great light specialist, and I'm blanking out on her name. But she oftentimes will publish studies or research specific to things like that. That might be the best resource to go to
Okay.
in terms of understanding the specifics around circadian lighting on various conditions.
Okay.
Yeah, they've got a pretty good team that is specifically around light that could probably shed light on that.
And I would just extend that question a little bit more to back when we started making things like incandescent light bulbs being, either illegal or you can't, you had to reduce the usage, and we're being forced to use things like compact fluorescents and LEDs. From a medical standpoint, is there any type of lighting you find to be worse than others?
Well, certainly white lights
Yeah.
are, incandescent light bulbs are certainly not conducive to our mental well-being. They don't really mimic the sun. We want things as close as possible that mimic, the sun throughout the day,
Mhm.
and even the night hours. But those certainly, probably have some of the worst, impact on our mental health specifically.
Wow.
Yeah, I definitely do not put those in any of the homes.
Okay. And so that's good to know, because right now, of course, this is a big topic, and it's not only from a standpoint of the color or temperature of the light, but it's also
Yeah.
what's the impact of the electromagnetic field created by the light itself.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I'll be honest, I need to get better on the science of that particular aspect of things.
Well,
But as it's actually funny, I'm getting approached by corporations to figure out workspaces. So it tends to be more of an issue in those environments than it
mm,
is in some of the homes. And so now I'm specifically looking at those types of corporate lighting structures that could impact productivity and well-being throughout the day as well. But we're just starting to get into the work environment because a lot of people are trying to figure out how to get people back into the office. And
mhm.
of course, the expectation now of people who do go back into the office is that they're going to go back into an office with someone who's looking after their health and well-being.
So on that note, I remember back in the early 2000s, I believe, working on a project, the National Audubon Society,
Hmm.
and they found that so that at like workstations around the building, they made sure, first of all, everybody had natural light, access to natural light at their desk. And they also brought in individual um, HVAC controls for every desk so that each individual could change the temperature, the airflow, and they found that between natural light and the fresh air that they got, that worker productivity went up tremendously.
Yeah.
And so I see this now as being something that obviously the well standard is taking charge on this. I hope that the architectural community is also looking at this as a way to attract people back to the office, knowing that it's not going to feel like you're stuck in some, you know, box that you feel like you're not have access to the outdoors.
Yeah, I mean I like to sort of split the benefits being invisible and visible. Those are some of the invisible benefits that oftentimes the employees don't even know that they're getting the health benefits, and they don't realize that they're actually being more productive. But it's actually a win-win. It helps both the employer as well as the employee. And then there's the visible things, for example, that I'm going to put in a mindfulness space or sleep pods, or I'm going to change, the lighting throughout the day as a result. Those are visible benefits that people can oftentimes see that could entice them back into the office. But I think it's a combination of both, that actually has to be at play. I'm
So,
curious. I'm curious. Do you use, I mean, as part of a material perspective, I recommend a lot of hempcrete in some of the homes.
mm,
Do you guys use hemp, for moisture absorption and CO2 absorption as well inside the homes?
yeah, I mean, hempcrete is certainly a viable option, provided that it's with a client that has access to material
Yeah.
readily.
Yeah. It's different
Um, it-
installation and it's expensive too.
yeah, I mean, it's like the idea of doing insulated concrete form, which is essentially more the synthetic version of hempcrete, because of the insulation itself being a rigid styro. But the concept of it is somewhat similar. So the two problems with hempcrete, from what I see, is availability, because if you don't have a plant nearby, it becomes very expensive to get the product, and then the knowledge on how to use it. I also find that um, a project that's designed to be built with hempcrete, and any natural building material for that matter, needs to be done 100% true to design from start to finish. And so you're involved in the project. I'm sure you're going to make sure that the entire team is going to be doing this properly. It's going to use the materials as directed. Unfortunately, the way the residential industry is, I mean, the residential construction industry is still the Wild West. If it's not written and detailed on the drawing, it doesn't exist. So you may say on the drawing,
Yeah.
this, arrow to hempcrete for your structure,
Yeah.
but then you don't have anything in there about what type of natural plaster to be used on it, mineral paints to be used on it, and it just says paint. Well, they're going to go ahead and just go down to the, Sherwin-Williams store and just buy latex paint. Now you've completely ruined the entire process of using hempcrete, and so it really requires uh, buy-in from all the subs and suppliers on
Yeah.
the project, that we have this one common goal of building this natural home for this client, and that's very difficult to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we oftentimes even don't recommend it for the whole home, just because just the expense of it.
Yeah,
We just do particular rooms with it.
but I see it as being a huge benefit if you can afford it, and if it's available.
Yeah.
There are definitely benefits to it. Going back to some of the original questions we were discussing about moisture in homes, and the way homes are built today that don't allow for that moisture transmission. I
Hmm.
guess my professional opinion is, either you build a home that's completely breathable, or you build a home that's completely non-breathable. You can't do in between. And this is where our industry is. Like 99% of the industry is in between.
Yeah. So what are, just sort of flipping the equation here, if you had three material recommendations that you would give a client for better health, let's say they can't do
Mhm.
the whole works of the home, but there are three things that you say you must consider as your top factors. What are they?
Wow,
Is it
that's a good question. So 90% of the chemical issues that you find inside of your home, chemical emissions, will come from the things you see and touch on a daily basis. Number one is flooring. The very first thing I would tell every customer is, get rid of carpeting. Do not use carpeting in your house. It is, unless you're buying one of the two brands in the world that's completely free of synthetic chemicals, it's going to contain formaldehyde that off gases for sometimes 30 years plus.
Hmm.
So avoid carpeting. Number one. Number two, I would use a, if you're going to paint the walls, either use a paint that is completely free of chemical off-gassing, something like the AFM Safe Coat, or if it's a breathable situation, use a mineral paint like Kyme or Roma Bio, something that's going to allow that moisture transmission and not get it stuck behind the paint, leading to mold in the walls. Third thing is, make sure you have a very talented HVAC professional involved in the project to balance the air, to dehumidify, to humidify, because this is where we all run into problems. We design a home that is, let's say we design a home that's free of toxic off-gassing, but then we forget about the balance of the HVAC system. And 3 years down the road, we've got a mold problem in the house because of moisture that's coming in somewhere that somebody forgot about.
Yeah.
It's got to be done, in a very mindful manner. And unfortunately, some of these components are just kind of thrown together because that's how the industry does it.
Yeah.
So those would be my top three.
That's
How
great. I
about
like
you?
those. I don't know. I don't approach the home from that perspective.
Oh
So
yeah,
give me a condition, I'll give you my top three. But generally, I mean, it's good to know that those are the top three things that, from a material perspective where you
yeah,
can have significant impact. So it's great. I mean, I would probably add as I agree with the whole flooring element to things, but then what you end up having is everyone covering up their floors with other types of soft material, which
right.
could counter the fact that they just don't have carpet, right? So but the fourth I would add to it, I think lighting has a significant impact,
Yeah.
across the board. It's usually, oftentimes overlooked for the aesthetics versus the actual functionality of it.
Right. And lighting is really a conundrum for a lot of people because again, it's the impact of not only the light source, the color of the light or the temperature, but also what else is being caused by it, whether it's electromagnetic fields, what have you. And this has become a real issue for a lot of our clients, and we just don't have any good answers right now. I think that obviously going back to that statement of making sure the bedroom is the most important room of the home, I think we can concentrate a little bit more on that. I do believe that the whole concept of bringing the outdoors in,
Yep.
being at one
Exposure
with,
to the outside, and again, one of the listeners here, or viewers, mentioned sound as well. So the acoustics of the home and sound therapy, of course, is definitely a huge component.
for sure,
It's
for
hard. It's
sure.
hard to pin down the top three. I mean, there's so many
It
important
is.
factors.
Well, and this is why I work with individuals one-on-one because everybody's a little bit different. Everybody has, it's like, the difference between reading a book on how to take care of yourself or working with a physician who can help you take care of yourself.
Yeah.
It's no two people are alike. And so it's very difficult to say, here's a book on building a healthy home. Well, most people, it's just not going to work for them. So I have to work with individuals one-on-one to make sure that we do cross those T's and dot those I's.
Yep.
So just wrapping up here in the last few minutes, any new technologies on the horizon that you're looking at besides, some of the things we've talked about already? I just think that there's so much out there that we could look into. If you're a homeowner, what's something to look forward to maybe in the next few years?
Well, I'm a big fan of some of these sensors that we're going to be putting inside the homes. I think we're still ahead of our time. I think there's a lot of like gimmicky things that are on the marketplace, but I spent my career really looking at digital health innovation. And I think during the pandemic, we probably saw about 10 years worth of innovation in the span of 2 years. So I'm really excited about some of the things that are coming out from those sensors, because when you start combining sensors with AI, and they understand your movements, your behaviors, your patterns, and things like that, what to me would be the ultimate home is the adaptive home.
Mm.
So it actually adapts to my core needs based on how it's tracking and measuring me. That is ultimately, I think, where we'll probably be in the 10, 20, 25-year horizon. But it's going to be sort of micro innovations over the course of time. And how do we build in those sensors into the home that are informative, but also not invoking on our privacy?
Fantastic. Dr. G, you are a wealth of knowledge, and I'm people can see the smile I have on my face from listening to you. It's just excellent information. You're doing groundbreaking work on your projects with your clients. What's the best way to get a hold of you or your team, or to learn more about what you do?
Yeah, I mean, the two places that I probably spend the most amount of time are either LinkedIn, or they can go to my website, which is the Well Home. It's thewellho.me. Although you can probably go to thewellhome.co as well. It'll direct you there. But thewellho.me is the best place to go. We're on all the different social networks, but LinkedIn, if they want to connect with me directly, just go ahead and reach out. Just put into the note that you had saw me on this podcast or on the show, and I will certainly accept it, and we can have a conversation.
Excellent. And if you do go there, folks, please, mention the show, of course, but I'm hoping that when I go there, maybe in the next 6 months, year and a half down the road, I'm going to see information on that development you talked about earlier, because that is very, very exciting. It, just well needed in this country. We need examples on how to do it right.
Yeah. Well, great.
Dr.
Well,
G,
thank you, Andy.
thank you. Appreciate your time. And everybody, thank you for watching this episode as well as this season of Non-Toxic Environments. We'll be back again in a few weeks with another wonderful show. Take care, everyone.
Take care. Bye. Thanks.